Buying your first reticulated python might be the biggest decision of your life. Or, it might be like a 1,500 gram decision. Today, I am going to teach you what makes the difference and how you can be sure to pick the right snake for you. The biggest problem facing the reticulated python market today is that reticulated pythons can be really big. And there's nothing wrong with that, except when you thought you were gonna get something small. Now there's a lot of would-be pet keepers that just don't know their own limits, and that's a whole other problem, maybe one for a video for another day. But the other issue is breeders who actually will be incentivized to tell you a snake that they're selling you is gonna stay smaller than it actually will, so that you'll buy something that they happen to have on their table instead of making the right snake for you. So before you go buy that dwarf or super dwarf reticulated python, you're gonna wanna know the answer to these three questions. 1, how big do they actually get? 2, what is it that makes them smaller in the first place? And 3, who is it that's making them smaller, or where to buy? So let's get right into it, guys. Number 1, how big does a dwarf or super dwarf actually get? If you want the answer, adults that are called super dwarfs can get anything from 5 to 18 feet. That's probably something that's like between 1 and 2,000 grams or 150 pounds. What? How on earth does that help somebody buy something? You see, a lot of us have learned about something like a specific pure super dwarf island locality, let's say Kalatoas, and they say, hey, these guys get 6 to 8 feet. But that is not the only kind of snake that people sell as a super dwarf. And I'm not even talking like completely misrepresented animals here. I'm just talking about stretching the truth a little, or not the best breeding practices if you were truly going for small size, things of that nature. You see, there's pure super dwarfs, and then there's like industry standards for super dwarfs that are crosses. This girl, for example, I could tell she's a cross right out of the gate because she has the tiger morph. That is not a morph that was ever found on any dwarf or super dwarf location, and therefore she must be crossed into larger bloodlines in order to get these looks. This is true of almost every morph in reticulated pythons. If it's called a dwarf or a super dwarf and you see a morph in there, it's a cross. Now this doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Here at Reach Our Reptiles, we have many morph crosses that are actually the same size as pure dwarf and super dwarfs, but it's a long, hard road to get there as a breeder. Furthermore, every step along that road, you're going to get a more and more refined outcome. That is, your first and second generation crosses might be less consistent or larger in size with a wider range of adults. And then as you get multiple generations into pure super dwarf breedings, you can start to really lock down whatever it is that's making them so tiny. Because remember, these dwarf and super dwarfs are naturally occurring island races, not some kind of simple Mendelian genetics. The main idea here, guys, is that when you're crossing literally one of, if not the world's largest snake into something that's very small and manageable from a pet trade type of perspective, you're going to get every size range in between. Now, one thing that always confuses people with actual adult size is the length. And numbers can be deceiving because you're probably not used to an animal like a super dwarf retic. I mean, these two snakes are pretty much the same size, right? I mean, they are, if anything. This one's a little heavier, but here's how long they are. See what I mean? So the second thing you need to understand is what actually makes them small. And there are a variety of factors. One of the main factors is the locality they come from. This is actually a little poster of an island chain where all the dwarf and super dwarf retics come from, as well as beautiful pictures of the 7 available localities we have here in the United States. The perfect addition to any reptile room. The localities from this island chain are Solaire, Tombalongan, Kayawati, Jampaya, Karompa, Kalatoa, and Madu. So some of these localities achieve a naturally larger size than others, but another layer that adds complication is exactly what percentages of these localities are they? So you're creating like a mixed race snake, right? In other words, if I said I'm half Irish and then I marry someone that is like totally Irish, my kids are gonna be 3/4 Irish, and they'll probably be more Irish-ish. We've got a whole video on how all that kind of stuff works that you can watch right here. Now, if localities are kind of like the paints that the artists use and the percentages are the brains of the operation or the techniques, then the actual art involved in breeding dwarf and super dwarf retics is how you select for the size. So years ago, one of the things that I learned in the breedings, we were taking the same localities, back then it was Kalatoa, in the same percentages, let's say 75% Kalatoa, and getting radically different sizes depending on if the Kalatoa was the mother or the father. Now from a breeder's standpoint, more baby snakes that are awesome means more eggs would be a better thing. So the common sense thing to do would be to take a dwarf or a super dwarf male and run it into a mainland reticulated python female that has those morphs that we love to get in the smaller sizes. Those big females might lay 60 to 80 eggs in one pup, and that's a lot of cool super dwarfs, except when it isn't. You see, the problem was the animals from those crossings seemed to start out larger and just continue to get larger with a normal standard python feeding diet. On the other hand, when we used those super dwarf Kalatoa females and ran them to younger mainland males that were still small enough to get the job done with a female like that, I might only get 6 to 10 eggs, but the resulting babies were significantly smaller. So in today's world, with many generations of selective breeding intentionally for size going on, you could totally get an awesome tiny retic, but you need to get it from someone who actually acknowledges that this art exists and is something that should really be adhered to. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. If you're using smaller snakes, you're getting smaller babies, but there's still people who say, no, that doesn't matter. And that kind of brings us to point number 3. Who out there actually makes these things smaller? Where should I buy them from? Now here at Reach Out Reptiles, we have been specifically breeding all these cool colors and combos into the smallest possible sizes and achieving every size range along the way for over a decade. And a lot of our bloodlines that we started here at Reach Out Reptiles have become the foundation for a greater community out there. So if you're someone that is really into giant snakes in smaller packages, then I specifically have a message for you that I'm gonna tell you in 53 seconds. But first I wanna introduce you quickly to these people. This is our Patreon community, and this has been a really awesome place for us to learn and grow together as a community so that we can make the super dwarf reticulated python of the future. As a group of absolute dwarf and super dwarf enthusiasts, we have a lot of fun along the way. You know, one of the things I always enjoyed collecting was fine automobiles. Unfortunately, I've never been able to attain one. So instead, I grabbed stuff like this, kind of industrial size, informational brochures on classic automobiles. I love this thing. In fact, I loved it so much that I decided we should take the inspiration and actually make a collectible version of that thing for ourselves in that industrial format and style. Probably the best thing I know about getting enthusiasts enthused about dwarf and super dwarf reticulated pythons. So why am I saying all this stuff? Well, here's the point that you've been waiting 53 seconds for. Quite possibly the best breeder of small size lineages that you can find of dwarf and super dwarfs that are gonna carry the market well into the future could be you. You see, a small reticulated python isn't the absolute best pet for everyone, but take it from a guy who has like, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of these, and one big giant one of those, it's a whole lot easier to be the giant snake's uncle. Go visit it at a friend's house, and if you want multiple animals, keep one of these. The thing about breeders is you always have to have multiple animals. And because it's a process to shrink them down, like newer projects are usually bigger and more refined projects are gonna be smaller if done well. But because of that process, there's so much to look forward to in the future breeding of dwarf and super dwarf reticulated pythons that could be up to you. Now, if you just wanna enjoy the awesome relationship that you can have with one of these animals, sit back and relax on the shoulders and the efforts of another breeder, all you have to do is call us up and we'll hook you up with the right baby for what size range you're looking for. But guys, it's 2025, the year of the snake. These are the snakes of the future. Everybody's bucket list animal, whether they're drooling over a certain pure locality, have a cool morph combo in mind, there's something to pursue for every aspiring breeder out there. And if you want to learn the right way to do it with the right kind of community and people around you every step of the way, well, now you know. What's that, rubber ducky? It's time for Ship Your Reptiles blooper of the video this week? I don't think we made any bloopers this time. Here we go. Ow, right through the finger webbing. That's gross. Clean up, paper towel. I like how you're just standing there filming me. This is so gross and I can't look away. All right, super dwarves. Super dwarves.